Hi, it's me again. The common VHF radio, much abused, much misunderstood. There's all kinds of things to know about this. The first thing is, if you're embarking on an international sailing adventure, you're probably going to need a radio license and a radio operator, well, certainly a radio operator's license to use it. Everywhere outside of the US, an operator of a VHF marine band radio must have an operator's license. I happen to have one because I'm RHA trained. Outside of the US, you actually have to get a license to buy one as well. But within the US, we can rock up to West Marine with our couple $100 and we can buy ourselves a VHF radio. Great, it's a very fantastic safety feature. Many years ago, the frequencies around 150 megahertz were given over to marine band radio. And initially they were totally analog, about 130 channels, and they're simplex, meaning they're single direction. They only work in one direction. And they were allocated within the band, within those 130 channels, to all kinds of different functionality. First 10 are used for weather, for example, and then we obviously have 16, which everybody knows, which is used for emergency hailing, so calling. We don't want to keep chatting on 16, so if we're talking to the Coast Guard, they'll move us to one of their working channels, probably 21A. We have channels like 9, which is a backup hailing channel, 13, which we use bridge to bridge. And then when we get way up the bands, around 68 to 72, we have all the sort of pleasure channels that we can just use to chat to our buddies about where the fish are biting and all that good stuff. So that's the analog side of things. Within the analog side of things, remember it's a simplex system. And so we use the terms over and out. And as a kid, I always remember watching Starsky and Hutch on television, shows how old I am, and they'd scream to a halt, jump out of the car, scream in the radio, and they'd end with over and out. Well, when we're using a VHF radio, we never use over and out in the same sentence. Because it's a simplex channel and we're chatting to someone, we'll say, hey, how's the fish biting around round rocks? Over. I'm passing the invitation to talk to the other person. They then talk. At the end of it, they'll use the term over, pass it back to me. When I've completely finished the conversation, I'll say out. Oh, great, have a nice day. Out. Over and out. That's part of the decorum. Around 20, 30 years ago, some of the channels within that 130 channel band were allocated to something called Digital Selective Calling, or DSC. You'll see there's a button here, DSC. What DSC enables me to do is, if I know the registration number, called the MMSI number, of my radio, I can put in my friend's MMSI number and I can call him directly. And the DSC takes me to basically a phone book of my friend's numbers. Importantly, DSC added other functionality. If I flip this little thing here, I have a red emergency button. If I push that button momentarily, I'll get a menu up on the display. And the menu will ask me to select either a Mayday or a pom-pom. And we'll talk a little bit about Mayday and pom-poms in a minute. If I open the little hatch and push the button for 5 seconds, it will automatically send a Mayday. Automatically. So I can push it momentarily and choose, or I can hold it and it'll send a Mayday. The difference between Mayday and pom-pom is Mayday is life-threatening issue. I've got some sort of life-threatening emergency. And it's from the French, Medea, bring me aid. Pom-pom is less life-threatening. It's like, it's an emergency, I've run aground, I've broken something, and it actually comes from the French, sepenier, meaning to fix. So I have Mayday, I have pom-pom, and then you'll also sometimes hear Sécurité. And Sécurité is just an information message about something that might impact your safety. And I occasionally called them in. Great example, I'm coming down Newburyport Harbour. There's a big tree trunk floating down by the bridge, and I call it in as the Sécurité. Sécurité, all vessels. There's a big log floating down Newburyport Harbour. So that's the kind of use of Sécurité. Now, here we are sitting at the nav station on Stay Lost, and like all good skippers, my radio is here, and the captain of this vessel has listed the protocol to use when I need to make an emergency call. And it's important that everybody understands that there is a protocol. The protocol is, to be honest, not easy to remember. I remember it through a thing called MIP Danio. And I always think of Hawaii 5-0, MIP Danio. And the protocol is you basically call Mayday with 3 times. Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. That's the M. I, information. This is the sailing vessel. Stay lost, stay lost, stay lost. Here I have my MMSI number recorded, so I can transmit that. Here I have my call sign, Whiskey Delta Quebec 2633. I would also say that. So that's the I. P, my position. What is my position? My lat and my long. Typically I can read it off my radio, or I can read it off my nav system. We're up to D. What is the nature of the distress? Well, I'm sinking. I've run aground. My first mate's hit his head, whatever it might be. MIP Danio, A. So the A is, what kind of assistance do I need? I need a tow. I need a medical evacuation or whatever. N, the number of people on board. I, additional information. We're all wearing our life jackets. O, over to you, over to the Coast Guard. And the Coast Guard are excellent at triaging these things. So if you call in a Mayday, they may work with you and triage it back to a pom-pom. They also have the ability to bring in a doctor. So if you're out at sea, they can help you triage somebody's injury. And they're very, very good at getting this information out of you. Now, as we upgraded radios and added AIS, when I press the emergency button, will also add my lat and my long. So prior to AIS, the DSC, if I plugged in my chart plotter, I probably could send my latitude and longitude, so the position part. But it's very important to realize, when I push this button and send a DSC signal with an emergency Mayday, the Coast Guard will receive it. The Coast Guard will then send an acknowledgement. The screen will flash red, flash, flash, flash. Acknowledged, it'll say in big letters across here. At that point, I must call in an analog backup that includes my MMSI number, because as part of that digital distress signal, the MMSI number is sent with the information. And so the Coast Guard want to cross-reference the MMSI number to the digital Mayday they received. And here's the real gotcha. If you do not send in or call in an analog follow-up, the Coast Guard will do absolutely nothing. So running up to your radio and pushing the red button does not mean the Coast Guard's on its way. It means the Coast Guard has received a digital distress signal from your area, from your lat and long, but they will do absolutely nothing until they've spoken to you and they understand the nature of your distress and what should they descend. And it's important to realize, in handing over all these digital frequencies, we lost some of the channels. And so all of this digital selective calling, hailing, is done on channel 70, but of the 130 channels that were originally allocated, about half are now used for DSC, for emergency communications, and also for AIS. We send AIS over the same frequencies. One last thing to be really clear about. These have limited range. Basically, the frequencies chosen, around 150 megahertz, are line of sight frequencies. Line of sight can be calculated by 1.2 times the square root of your height above water in feet. So if I have a 50-foot mast, let's call it 49 feet, that's 7 miles. 1.2 times 7 miles is about 8.4 miles. But if you think about the shape of the Earth, they're additive. So if I'm talking sailing boat to sailing boat, across that would be 8.4 miles twice, so about 16.8 miles. That's my range. Another important point to remember is there are 2 classes of these radios. There's Class A's and Class B's. This is a Class B recreational radio. Commercial vessels will have a Class A. In addition to having a Class A, most commercial vessels will also report via satellite. And one of the functionality of the system, which was brilliant when they designed it, was they sort of crowdsourced communication, because a Class A commercial radio will automatically relay a Class B signal. So if I'm halfway to Bermuda, I'm 300 miles from land, there's no way I have the range to reach a Coast Guard tower on land. But if I'm within 16 miles of the infrastructure of a tanker or a passing cruise liner, that cruise liner will relay my Mayday signal via satellite through its Class A receiver. There you go, a lot of stuff.